Well, I hope you've had a good day. I hope now maybe we can clear our minds if we're stressed at all about anything, and we can just take the next few minutes to study about the great God that we all serve. We're almost done with the book of Job, okay? So if you are really getting tired with Job, just hang on with me for a few more chapters and we will be done with the book. But before we get started tonight, there are some people that still have COVID that we need to keep in our prayers. And if you're one of those people and we don't know about it, please let us know. And you know what? Not even with COVID. I mean, if you have anything going on in your life that is bothering you, let us know. We want to be praying for you. That's number one. And we also want to let you know that we love you. And if we can do anything for you, we just ask that you would ask us. Now, you might remember we're at the end of Job chapter 36. That's where we left off last week. And Elihu is still talking. This young guy that seems to think he's full of wisdom because he thinks he's speaking on behalf of God, but yet he uses a lot of words to get his point across because he has, let's see, I think... been speaking since chapter 32, and we're finishing chapter 36 tonight, and in chapter 37, Elihu is still speaking. So he uses a lot of words, which is ironic because he accuses Job, right, of continuing to run his mouth, and he thinks that's part of Job's problem. Job, if you would just shut up and you would listen to what people are trying to tell you, everything would be better for you. Well, it's a little ironic. So Job chapter 37, remember Elihu has brought up at the beginning of chapter 36 this idea that God can use pain and he can use affliction on people that he loves in order to keep them maybe from walking down the wrong path, because God knows the end of that path. And if it's a path that doesn't lead to him, well, maybe he can inflict pain on a person in such a way that that person will stop dead in their tracks. They will become aware of the path that they are on, but not only that, they'll become aware of what's at the end of that path. And maybe that pain will just get them to stop, look for another route, a route that leads to God. He reminds Job of that. And we get in chapter 36, we look in verse 24. This is where we're going to begin this week. Remember to extol his work of which men have sung. Men sing to show God that he is great. God deserves praise. That's why we sing. When we sing, we praise God. We get that. All mankind has looked on it. Man beholds it from afar. Behold, God is great, and we know him not. The number of his years is unsearchable. We know things about God, but we surely don't know everything about God. I mean, right? God is beyond our comprehension in so many ways, the things that God is able to do. Now, that doesn't mean we're not able to know him. It just means that we are not able to understand a lot about him. But we're also not able to understand the number of his years. Okay, God is eternal. God did not have a beginning, and God does not have an end. So he doesn't have a certain number of years, but that can also be hard for us to wrap our minds around. For he draws up the drops of water. They distill his mist in rain, which the skies pour down and drop on mankind abundantly. Elihu is saying, Job, do you want to know how truly great and awesome God is and how powerful God truly is? Look at the sky, my friend. When you see the rain falling from the clouds, guess who has commanded that rain to fall? But before he commanded that rain to fall, guess who commanded that rain to gather in the clouds? God did. He called that rain to gather. And then when he was ready, it didn't happen on its own. When God was ready, he commanded that cloud to pour its rain down on the earth. And you can just think in times of drought how stressed and vexed people can truly become, especially at this point in the world, because if you don't have rain and your crops don't grow, well, guess what? You don't eat. And guess what? There's a good possibility if you don't eat because of a famine, there's a good possibility you might die or someone close to you might die. So when God pours rain on the earth, people rejoice. That's when people might want to sing and tell God, acknowledge that God is the great being in heaven that cares for his people. Can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds, the thundering of his pavilion? Behold, he scatters his lightning about him and covers the roots of the sea. For by these he judges peoples, and he gives food in abundance. We can see God almost as we read this, like the image is God is riding on top of these clouds, and he's commanding them to go wherever he wants them to go. And God is the reason that after lightning it thunders. God's powerful. That's the illustration. That's the picture Elihu wants us to see from Job chapter 36, at least at the end. He covers his hands with lightning that we just read and commands it to strike the mark. Here God is riding on clouds, and it's almost like he has a bow and arrow, and in his bow and arrow he has a lightning bolt, and there's a mark he's trying to hit because he wants lightning over there. So he pulls back and he shoots that lightning bolt wherever he wants it to be. That's power. That's a being that deserves to be praised. Its crashing declares his presence. The cattle also declare that he rises. After God shoots that lightning bolt and you wait a few minutes, you hear that boom. Elihu says, think about the power of God. Well, we get to chapter 37 now. At this also my heart trembles and leaps out of its place. Keep listening to the thunder of his voice and the rumbling that comes from his mouth. Job, where does that thunder come from? When we hear thunder, think of God. When Elihu thinks of, when he steps back and reflects on the noise that he just heard after he saw lightning, which we would call thunder, obviously, Elihu steps back and he says, my heart trembles and leaps out of its place, because that is God. That's power. Under the whole heaven he lets it go, in his lightning to the corners of the earth. All the natural elements of the world are subject to the great God that we serve. It does nothing without God's command. After it, his voice roars. I mean, again, Elihu is really playing off this image of thunder and lightning. You see a flash of lightning. After that flash, silence, peace. But Elihu's reminding Job, don't be deceived, Job, that peace, that calm, that stillness is followed by God's great roar. And when we hear that ought to make our heart tremble, like Elihu says. We ought to reflect on the being that we serve. He thunders after it, his voice roars. He thunders with his majestic voice, and he does not restrain the lightnings when his voice is heard. God thunders wondrously with his voice. He does things that we cannot comprehend. How does all this work? Well, you know what? We don't know, Elihu says, but you know what? When we hear it, when we see it, all we can do is think about God, think about where we stand in comparison to him. That's what this is about. For to the snow, he says, fall on the earth. Again, The idea in Job, at the end of Job chapter 36 and in Job chapter 37, is that natural elements in the world, storms, snow, thunderings, lightnings, all these things, they don't happen without God commanding them to happen. They're subject to Him. When that rain that God commands from the clouds to fall, if God desires, He's so powerful He can command that rain to freeze. Where snow falls on the earth, but if God also wants to, He can command that rain to fall from the cloud, but not in a gentle manner, in a manner that is torrential. He seals up the hand of every man, that all men whom He made may know it. Then the beasts go into their lairs and remain in their dens. God can use the natural elements of the world to bless or to cause chaos. He might command the clouds to release the rain so that it can wet the dry soil below, so that His people can have an abundance of food. But for people that act wickedly, God can disrupt their lives and cause the rain to literally pour from the clouds in such a way that they're not able to do anything. From its chamber comes the whirlwind, and cold from the scattering winds. By the breath of God ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen fast. He loads the thick cloud with moisture. The clouds scatter His lightning. Look at what God does. They turn around and around by His guidance to accomplish all that He commands on the face of the habitable world. There's no doubt about it that when God causes the rain to pour from the earth in such a way that humans can no longer do what they desire to do. They have to go seek shelter, and animals have to get out of the elements and go into their layers, like Elihu says. That's a time for people to think, not just to think about what's going on, but to think about why it's happening. When that rain is pouring, hopefully that makes them think about the one that caused the rain to pour. It's a time for them to question. It's a time for them to reflect. It's a time for them to think about God. This is the idea in verse 13. Whether for correction or for His land or for love, He causes it to happen. God can use rain, and God can use wind, and God can use whatever He wants in such a way to accomplish His will. You see the idea here that God can use pain and affliction to cause people hopefully to stop, to think about Him, and to maybe switch and get on another path. Not all pain and affliction is bad. Hear this, O Job. Stop and consider the wondrous works of God. Just stop, Job. Stop thinking. Stop talking. Take a minute and look around and think about the God that you've been talking about and that we're talking about now. Do you know how God lays his command upon them and causes the lightning of his cloud to shine? What's the answer to that question? No. Job, you can't explain that. You can't explain how that works. You can't even begin to comprehend how that works, Job. Now, remember, this is all tied back to what Job has been saying before. What does Job want? Job wants to go to court with God. That's what he ultimately wants. Job, let me get this right. You want to go before this being that we're thinking about now, this being that's so powerful, that can cause the rain to fall, that causes lightning to flash wherever he wants, and it's followed by his roar. You want to go before that being with a case that's been prepared by you so that you can convince him that you're right, and you can't even understand who he is or how he works. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, Elihu says. Do you know the balancings of the clouds, the wondrous works of him who is perfect in knowledge? You, whose garments are hot when the earth is still because of the south wind. When you feel that heat because of the south wind, that heat that causes people to become irritable, that heat that causes people to stop working because they just need to go get some shade, that heat that when you breathe into your lungs, you get the feeling that it's actually hard to breathe. You feel faint, because it's like that hot wind is drying you out. The being that caused that, Job, you want to go before him. You want to go before him when you're not at your best. Is that what you're saying? No, Job, surely not. Can you, like him, spread out the skies hard as a cast metal iron? Teach us what we shall say to him. We cannot draw up our case because of darkness. Job, you can't do any of these things. You can't spread out the skies. You can't cause clouds to scatter, and you certainly can't cause the clouds to gather before a storm. Shall it be told him that I would speak? Did a man ever wish that he would be swallowed up? Should someone go tell God, Job, that you're ready to bring your case before him? Are you sure you want to do that? It seems pretty foolish that somebody would want to bring a case before a being that's so powerful and so great that it invokes the feeling of awe within us. And now, no one looks on the light when it is bright in the skies, when the wind has passed and cleared them. Out of the north comes golden splendor. God is clothed with awesome majesty. The Almighty, we cannot find him. He's great in power. Justice and abundant righteousness he will not violate. Sounds familiar to what we read in the book of Psalms, right? Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Those two attributes are a part of who God is. Job, God is not going to violate justice. You've got in your head that you're not guilty, but you think God thinks you're guilty and he's punishing you. So you want to go tell God that you're not guilty. Job, God would never do anything to you in such a way that it could be said that he has perverted justice. He wouldn't do it. You need to stop, Job. You need to look around and you need to think about who God is. And you need to, instead of trying to force something on God, you need to take your thoughts about what you know in your situation and what you know about God, and you need to harmonize those things, Job. Therefore men fear him. He does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. That's what you ought to do, Job. You ought to look around and you ought to say no more. You should fear God. That's the feeling that should be invoked within you when you hear thunder and you see lightning, or you see snow, or that hot wind blows, or that cold wind blows, or you see ice. You should fear God. Now that sounds familiar to the ending of the book of Ecclesiastes, right? That's wisdom. Fear God and keep his commandments. Well, that's all the time that we have tonight. That might be one of my favorite chapters in the book of Job. God is great and powerful, and we can't even begin to comprehend it. But what we know is we should stop and we should give him all the praise that we possibly can, because he does love us. I hope you have a great rest of the week. I can't wait to see everybody Sunday. God bless.